Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Macbeth readings. And today we're going to start Act 2, which is one of my favorite acts, if not the favorite act, because it is the act where the murder takes place. It's an incredibly short act with only 4 scenes. And we're going to start with scene 1. So if you've got your No Fear Shakespeare books, we're on page 48. And at the very top of this page, I want you to do what we've been doing so far, and that is to write a summary at the very top. So I'm going to read mine out for you, and you can copy this down, or at this point, if you would prefer, you can wait until the end of the scene and come back and write your own summary, and that might just help you with your memory a little bit better than copying mine down. But here it goes, here's mine. Banquo is tired but can't sleep, as he's been having nightmares of the Weird Sisters. He mentions this to Macbeth, who denies thinking of them. Banquo gives him a diamond, from Duncan. Macbeth bids him farewell and then hallucinates about a dagger. So that last bit is probably the most important bit of this scene. So here we get a very new theme, and that is the theme of hallucinations. Now you could link this to the theme of madness that's mentioned back in Act 1 when Banquo asks Macbeth if they've eaten a poison root. So they've had something that's messed with their senses. That's when they meet the witches in scene 3. But this is, of course, linked to a whole new thing, and that is imagery. So there are going to be 2 main images in this scene. The first is dagger, a dagger. And the idea of a dagger recurs throughout the rest of the play because that is what Macbeth uses to kill Duncan. They use the daggers of the guards, the chamberlains that are in Duncan's room. The other image that we're going to see throughout the rest of the play that begins here and is probably a stronger image is the image of blood and the idea of red hands. So both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth by the end of this act are going to end up with red hands. Macbeth from killing the chamberlains and King Duncan, and Lady Macbeth because she goes back to wipe the blood of Duncan on the chamberlains, the guards of the chamber. And so they both end up with blood all over their hands. They end up red-handed, and this is a powerful image that ends up linking very closely to madness. Now, one essay that you could write when studying this text is about the theme of madness, so discussing the theme of madness and hallucinations. The 2 main hallucinations, the first one's in this act, and that's the hallucination of the dagger. So before Macbeth kills Duncan, he's going to see a dagger floating before him. And that can be interpreted in 2 ways. The main and most useful way to remember is that the dagger is a symbol of his broken mind. So the idea that he's feeling guilty, he knows what he's about to do, and so he starts to see this dagger. The second interpretation that I like to use sometimes is that the dagger is manifested in some way by evil powers, by supernatural powers. We know later when he meets up with the witches that they are able to bring forth visions, and so it is within the realm of reason, within the world of this text, that the dagger is a vision that's been sent to him. Now, the second vision or hallucination that Macbeth sees happens in the next act. After he kills his friend Banquo, he sees Banquo's ghost at a party. But it's the third vision or hallucination that I want you to pay attention because it links very closely to this act, and that's the idea of red or bloody hands. So not until Act 5 do we see Lady Macbeth start to have her own hallucinations. And she has the hallucination of what she calls a damned spot. And that is a spot of blood on her hand, and she starts to see the blood of Duncan on her hand, and she keeps scrubbing and scrubbing at her hands until she actually makes them bloody, and then that just confirms her hallucination even more. So if you wanted to, at the end of this play, you could write an essay about the hallucinations and what they've got to do with the theme of madness or the theme of guilt. And those would be your three main examples: the hallucination in this act, the dagger, the hallucination of Banquo's ghost, and Lady Macbeth's hallucination of the blood on her hands. So I'm going to leave it there because I have been talking for quite a while to introduce this act, and we'll get into reading it. So our first character for this scene is Banquo, and we'll be continuing to use this picture of him until he becomes a ghost. We have a new character in this act, and that is Banquo's young son Fleance, who will be represented by this picture. And we will be continuing to use Warrior Macbeth for this scene. Act 2, Scene 1 opens inside Macbeth's castle in Inverness. Fleance and Banquo enter, and Fleance is holding a torch before him, showing us that it is still night. How goes the night, boy? The moon is down. I have not heard the clock. And she goes down at 12. I take it 'tis later, sir. Hold. Take my sword. There's husbandry in heaven. Their candles are all out. Take thee that too. A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers, restrain me in the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. Enter Macbeth and a servant holding a torch. Give me my sword. Who's there? A friend. What, sir? Not yet at rest? The king's abed, he hath been in unusual pleasure, and sent forth great largesse to your offices. This diamond he greets your wife withal, by the name of the most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content. Being unprepared, our will became the servant to defect, which else should be free have wrought. All's well. I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you they have showed some truth. I think not of them. Yet, when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business, if you would grant the time. At your kindest leisure, if you shall cleave to my consent, when 'tis it shall make honour for you. Oh, I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear. I shall be counselled. Good, repose the while. Thanks, sir, the like to you. Exeunt Banquo and Fleance. Macbeth is left on stage with his servant. To the servant. Go, bid thy mistress, when my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell, get thee to bed. Exit the servant. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in a form as palpable as which I now draw. Thou marshallest me the way I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of their senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings and withered murder, alarumed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howl his watch. Thus, with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, toward his design, moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm-set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabout, and take the present horror from the time, which now suits with it. Whiles I threat, he lives, words to the heat of deeds too, cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. Okay, so that was quite a nice short scene. We're going to go back through it now, looking at vocabulary, themes, and meanings. So we're going to go back to page 48, and we're going to look at what Banquo means when he's walking through Inverness in the dark. So we're going to start around line 4 to 5. So just a little pretext to what's happening. Fleance is talking about how the moon has set early and they haven't heard the clock strike 12. And we're not going to hear the clock strike 12 until the very end when Macbeth is leaving to kill Duncan. So around line 4, Banquo says, there's husbandry in heaven, their candles are all out. And husbandry here is meaning thriftiness or stinginess. So he's basically saying the heavens are being very stingy. They've put all their candles out early. So this was a thing that people would have done before electricity to save money. They would have all gone around and put out all of their candles as soon as their guests left, so that they wouldn't be burning wax and they could save money. And so Banquo is making a joke saying, oh, heaven's being quite stingy tonight. They put all the candles out. So we can imagine it's quite cloudy, quite stormy. You can't see the moon and you can't see the stars. That's how thick the fog is in the night. We're going to keep going down now to after Macbeth snuck up. And this is another bit of dramatic irony. Macbeth is being slowly revealed to be a dangerous, deadly, and insane character. And so the fact that he's walking through in the dark and he frightens Banquo is a bit of foreshadowing that idea that he is a murderer, and indeed he is going to send murderers who are going to kill Banquo and try to kill Fleance in the dark. So there's a bit of foreshadowing there. And it's also dramatic irony on line 10 when he says, I'm a friend, because we find out later he's not a friend to Banquo. We'll continue going down line 11, 12. We're looking at line 13. And Banquo says that Duncan has sent forth great largesse. And here, or largesse, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry. And that means gift. So he sent forth a great gift. And what he does is he produces a diamond. And it's a gift for Lady Macbeth for being a wonderful hostess. And so this further drives home at the end of Act 1, I think it was scene 6, when they arrive outside of Inverness. And he makes that joke to her and he says, you should be thanking me for your pains because heaven rewards those who serve others, basically. But we now know for sure that that was a joke because he doesn't expect her to thank him. He is thanking her and he's given her a diamond. And if that isn't something that's going to make Macbeth and Lady Macbeth guilty about killing him, I don't know what would be. Underneath that, so we're looking at line 15, Banquo uses the phrase shut up. He says, and shut up in measureless content. And shut up here just means concluded. So he has just concluded the night in happiness, he's saying. We'll turn now to page 50 and we'll look at the two lines at the very top. And this is Macbeth still talking, and he says, our will became the servant to defect, which else should free have wrought. And to translate this, of course, you can always read your English side, which is the non-black box side, but just to translate it into our own words, he's saying, if we'd had more time, we would have entertained him better. So he's just sort of keeping up this facade, claiming that he wished he'd done more to be hospitable to Duncan. And of course, we know that that doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's a reflection of his guilt, because he plans to kill him, so it's not like he needs to be pleasing him very much. We'll go down to lines 21. We've got an outright lie from Macbeth. So what I want you to do, I want you to highlight line 21, and I want you to write next to it, outright lie. So this is an example that Macbeth is a liar. Before now, we've seen his asides, we've seen his two-facedness, but now we're starting to see him completely fabricate the truth. And he's saying it about the weird sisters. He says, I think not of them. And that's a nice quote that you could also record in the start of your booklet. It's to show Macbeth's character. So I think not of them. And underneath that, line 22, he says, we can entreat an hour to serve. That means find. We can find an hour to serve. We'll keep going down now, lines 24 and 25. It's Macbeth speaking again, and he says, if you shall cleave to my consent when 'tis, it shall make honour of you. So this is a very interesting thing. We've got his lying, we've got his two-facedness, but now we see a bit of manipulation. So he's almost giving away his plan to Banquo here. He says, if you are good to me, when the time comes, I'm going to be good to you. Now, how suspicious would that be when in just a few days' time, Macbeth is going to be king after the king is mysteriously murdered in his home? Banquo is going to be thinking back on this line, isn't he? And think, just before the king was murdered, Macbeth said something really strange to me. He said, you be good to me and I'll make sure it comes back to you when the time's right. That's going to be quite suspicious. And so, yes, that's basically what it means. If you are loyal to me, it will bring advantage to you. That's what Macbeth's saying. And so that's a very interesting line. We'll keep going down when Banquo replies to this. So we're now looking at lines 28. He says, my bosom franchised and allegiance clear. So he's basically saying, okay, great, I will be good to you because you're my friend, and that'll leave me with a guilt-free conscience, or a clear conscience, as it says in your books. Further down, we've got the word clutch. Let me clutch thee, when Macbeth sees the dagger. And their clutch means grab. So he's saying, let me grab you. He wants to grab the thing. Sorry, I just had to pause there for an emergency alert coming through on my phone, but it was just an update about the pandemic, so no new information really. We're going to turn now to page 52, and we're looking at this big, interesting monologue of Macbeth's. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to link a movie interpretation of this scene below. When in this movie interpretation that I want you to watch, there is a little boy, a ghost boy, holding the dagger that comes through, and that's just a really interesting interpretation. Of course, in many other stage productions, they've used everything from, of course, a knife on fishing wire to a holographic projection, and indeed there were mirrors in the original production of this play. And so I'm really interested to think, did they use like a piece of paper and project the image of the knife onto it? It's really interesting to think about how they've portrayed this in different ways, this hallucination. It very much could have been that they had the actor talking to nothing, so talking to thin air, and implying that the knife's not really there at all. It's all entirely in Macbeth's brain. And so we're going to go through this now on page 52 and just break down some of the language and talk about some of the references. So what we've got here, we'll start at line 36 when Macbeth says the line, sensible to feelings as to sight. So he's saying, are you just a vision, or am I able to touch you? He's talking to the knife that he sees, the dagger that's floating before him. And then he decides that it is a dagger of the mind, so it's just a hallucination. So what that's implying is that the actor on stage has reached forward, I'll use his hand, he's reached forward and he's gone to grab it, and his hand's gone through thin air, so he hasn't been able to grab it. Um, line 39, he says, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain. So think about, when is your head hot? When you've got a fever. So he's saying it's something coming from a feverish brain, so a feverish mind, heat-oppressed. We'll keep going down. We'll go down to line 46. And he's talking about the dudgeon. So a dudgeon is a wooden handle of a knife. So now he's saying, in his vision that he sees before him, the knife suddenly covered in blood. So there's blood on the dagger, on the actual blade, and there's blood on the dudgeon, on the handle. So now we've got two themes working together. We've got the theme of a dagger and of madness and visions, and we've also got the introduction of the theme of blood, which is going to be repeated in the next scene when Duncan and his guards are killed, and it's going to be repeated in Act 5 when Lady Macbeth is seeing blood on her hands, and there's also going to be mention of blood and gore, both when we see Banquo's ghost and when a new character that we're not going to see for a little bit while more, Macduff, when his family are killed. So we're going to see blood repeated throughout the play from here on out. If we go down, line 48, he says, which informs thus to mine eyes. So informs means presents this shape. So it's like giving something to my eyes. It's displayed to my eyes. We'll keep going down. There is an important mention. There's a capitalized name. You can see it on line 52, and it says Pale Hecate's offerings. Now, if we were to use the original pronunciation of this name, it would have been pronounced Hecate. And Hecate was a Greek goddess, and she was a Greek goddess of sorcery and of supernatural powers. In this case, Hecate is a being that the three weird sisters summon from the depths of what we can assume is hell, and helps them have their powers. So she helps them both see into the future and give the prophecies that they've already given to Macbeth and Banquo, and they're going to give Macbeth a further 3 prophecies, and she also helps them bring forth visions. And that's a really interesting thing for you to think about. You might want to, in an essay, argue that all of this is orchestrated by the witches, and you could say that this vision here of the dagger is produced by the witches, and there's indeed evidence you could use to support that. So it's important there for you to circle the name Hecate. It's pronounced Hecate in this play, and write down that she's the Greek goddess of sorcery, and that she's also going to appear later in the play. She's connected to the weird sisters. He talks about the wolf whose howls watch. So watch there means signal, thus with a stealthy pace. And we're just going to look at the English bit of this whole section. So we're starting around what would have been equivalent to line 55. If we read the English, it says, witches are offering sacrifices to their goddess Hecate. Old man Murder, having been roused by the howls of his wolf, walks silently to his destination, moving like Tarquin, as quiet as a ghost. Now, Tarquin's another historical reference that someone as educated as King James would have understood. So here we can see a sort of duality of different audiences. So we see Shakespeare's intended audience being spoken to here, and that's creating a barrier to his incidental audience, and that includes the people whom this would have been performed for later on, as well as us today reading it, the modern day audience. It's important to remember that Shakespeare was not writing for us. So when you're writing your essay, it would be a faux pas to say something like, Shakespeare intended for us to understand blah, 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 whatever you want to say. Instead, he's intending for King James and his courtiers to understand things. And so we have to do a little bit of extra work to understand what he's talking about. Now, fortunately, you have a footnote here in your No Fear Shakespeare books, and this tells us that Tarquin was a Roman prince who sneaked into a Roman wife's bedroom in the middle of the night and raped her. So here, Macbeth is comparing himself to a criminal, a brutal criminal, someone who's going to sneak into a bedroom and commit a crime. And so indeed, Duncan is asleep, and he is going to sneak in there and kill him and his guards. So he's comparing himself to Tarquin, and indeed James would have known who Tarquin was. I'll leave that there. Of course, then we hear a bell ringing. Now, I've used a picture of just a school bell, but what this would be referring to is a clock bell, and that's the recording I've used. So the clock bell is striking midnight, which is, of course, a special hour in different mythologies and different supernatural ideas. And so the midnight bell is striking just as Macbeth goes to kill Duncan. And I want you to pay attention to the very last line. Macbeth is saying that he hopes the bell doesn't wake Duncan because it's about to summon him either to heaven or to hell. So that's very much confirming that he plans to kill Duncan.